very much listening to this presentation. And I can also say, and then I speak for us as a group, that we have a lot of questions. And these are not just questions to point out things that were wrong. These are things that we would like to discuss with you because you enter upon topics which are not researched that often. So you open lines of exploration, and we would like to continue discussing that line with you. And in order to do that, we have organized our questions in a way not assigning questions to different persons, but we try to identify a series of topics that we would like to discuss. Then one of us will introduce the topic, and the other will also add questions to that, and we make it a sort of natural discussion pattern with you on one side and with the panel on the other side. So that's how we would like to proceed. And I would like to open that session with the topic of language and terminology. And I just would like to underline that this is a challenge for all PhD students who are not native English speakers and who have to publish a study in the English language. And I am very much aware that you make really great efforts to correct the English, to have it checked out by professionals. And I hope you're not disappointed if I say there are still some errors. There are still some things which are grammatically not completely correct. And I would just like to point out that, of course, we are not here as a committee to judge you on your mastery of English. That is not the issue here. However, the English sometimes influences the understanding. And that's where I would like to point out. There are some instances where the choice of words in English may have a little bit different connotation, extra understanding than just the direct translation from the dictionary. And sometimes that may cause confusion. So we're not judging you on the English, but we try to clarify a few points. The first of those points that I would like to point out is a part of your book. You look into similarities between problem-based learning and ESD. And when I look up the word similarities, that means things which are the same. And when I look at what you're doing, you're more interested in relating the two concepts to each other. So you're not, in my perception, looking at similarities per se, but you're looking at relationships between these two different concepts. Now, if you just check the synonym list in the language checker in Word, relationship is one of the words that pops up under the word similarities. So they are very close. But can you recognize that you are more interested in relationship than in similarities?
I recognize there is a relation. I also recognize there is a common overlap, or when I talk about the principles, and that's where I look into. When I look into contextual learning for ESD and in problem-based learning, there is no difference. So in opposition, it's similar. Another example, it's knowledge. How can you define the concept of metacognitive knowledge? How you difference in one area or the other? So it's also similar. So it's in the overall, similarities might not be the proper word, but when I look one by one.
Okay, maybe we do not completely understand each other at the same level, because in my perception, problem-based learning is a pedagogic method. It is how you organize the learning process.
Okay.
ESD is related to the content of the learning. So of course you can apply the method of problem-based learning to ESD, but you could also apply other methods.
Yes, I totally agree. I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Good.
But I'm not looking into problem-based learning as a method. But I'm looking is actually the learning principles that are behind. So for me, when I look into it, it's more than just a method.
Okay, I still say that language is a virus from outer space.
Uh,
It influences our behavior and we don't know how and why.
and I totally agree with you. There were some times that it was, I was thinking in a word in Portuguese and doesn't exist in English. So, and that is, and I know that, and that's a challenge as well, that I'm also constructing meaning, and I have to be careful with that.
Okay. I think you had
Yeah,
something to add to this.
continuing on this same line of issues related to language and terminology. I have a question on why you have chosen to use the term sustainable education, and you use it very much in your thesis. You have it even in your title. It would be interesting if you could explain why you chose that term and what it means to you and what it may mean to other people, how it could be misinterpreted.
So looking into the first part for the concept of sustainable education. The concept of sustainable education is when actually the education become I don't think it's correct to say full in relation to sustainable development, but in the whole perspective of the institution, you might have something from the top level. What is the purpose of the institution? What is the purpose? What is the vision? What actually the higher education as a social identity provides, and how this vision and mission are related with sustainability. When I came to sustainable education, is that this vision and mission is driven by sustainable development principles, which actually are practiced at a bottom level. That is not what happened in reality. One of the feelings I had when I started, it was a feeling, and then it then became a confirmation. And yesterday it was confirmed once again. There is a lot of fragmentation in terms of of what is practice or the efforts of integrating sustainable development in engineering education. They're one practice here, they're one practice there, they're one practice. There is not a full a network. There is not a share, and this is from top to bottom level, at all levels. And I think you can also see in your own institutions to some extent. When I say problem-based learning and sustainable engineering education, I try to approximate the maximum to the ideal, where actually from the vision and the mission to all the curriculums, to all the practice, there is sustainable development education for sustainable development principles guiding it.
So to you, sustainable education symbolizes something special, something that is more than the most commonly used term in this situation, which would be engineering education for sustainable development.
It's the next step where actually the entire institution go through a transformation.
But if you look at it purely linguistically, sustainable education, does it have to be related to sustainability?
That's the difference between the common use and the literature use. Because in Sterling, he talks about education as sustainable development or sustainable education.
So you are adopting Sterling's view on what sustainable education is, but you are using it without defining it early on. You have to read a few chapters before you can understand what you mean by sustainable education. I think this is one of those things that you should be a little bit careful about when it comes to using foreign languages, these terms that they may mean something to a certain group of people because it is a term that has been defined in that context, but to other people it may mean completely different things. And sustainable education as a word just is education that is sustainable and not necessarily related to sustainable development. So I was curious to why you chose to use that term.
And I think in discussing this, we never doubted your intentions, but we just want to point out how difficult it is to really capture the meaning in language which is foreign to all of us. But let's be clear about that. Jordi, did you have anything to add to this particular point? No, then we move on to the next point, which is closely related, and Magdalena will introduce
it. It actually is, and as I know that you were listening in yesterday, you might have suspected that there would be a question on epistemology and reflexivity. So I hope you have a really good answer.
I'm not being nervous.
So it's really, what I'm introducing here now is then two different important parts of doing research in general, but especially when doing qualitative research. And also, in particular, when you are dealing with these somewhat value-laden issues, as sustainability, for example. I think it is particularly important to try to state your starting points, your worldview, perhaps, your beliefs, which ideas that you rely on in the research that you do, because it could strongly influence the results. Also, in qualitative research, as a process of validating the results, you normally discuss the potential influence of your own person and ideas and experiences on the results, for example. So I'm going to give you the chance to both try to summarize the starting points and reflect on your role in how much you have influenced the study and its results.
Okay, from the research world view and epistemological, I'm a social constructivist. I didn't know. I thought I was a positivist. And I had that discussion.
I'm sure she's a pragmatist. How did you drag me in by that?
Yeah. I believe, and now moving into an epistemological level, it's moving to a quite up level in the discussion, I would say. So it's become quite general and abstract. So I believe that in the social constructivism, the meaning, and then we can go back to the language, the meaning is social constructed. It's because of social interactions and now socially, the human being as a social identity actually evolved through time. And sustainability is an example that actually has meanings, and they are constructed in different ways in different disciplinary areas. Because then you also have the epistemology, different discipline areas, I would say. So, and when I say I'm a social constructivist, I actually want to understand how these meanings are constructed in certain communities. In this case, specifically engineering education. I'm a scientist from background. So my understanding and my view, it's different from engineers. How I see knowledge, how I see knowledge research. That's why I thought I was a post-positivist. So first I had actually to understand how engineers think. I had to become familiarized what is the language, what is their way of thinking, their approach in their communities, I would say. And then I try to take their understanding of actual problem-based learning practices, their role to some extent, the knowledge they produce, how they should actually, because they are in the university level, they are researchers as well. They are not only problem solvers, they are not applying the knowledge to develop a technology. They're actually producing knowledge in research along with technology. So I'm trying to extract the meaning, the social and constructive meaning of sustainability, of their role. How can sustainability be integrated? Because it's not me giving them, it's them constructing the meaning for their community. So that's how I in relation to my role, I try to minimize as possible and try the bias. Of course, I have my eyes, my own interpretation, my own meaning of these concepts and everything. So when when I interview them, a lot of times I had to explain what was the meaning of interdisciplinarity, because they want to make sure that was the same meaning. And then there's something there that might, kind of bias a little bit, because I try not to. I don't want. I'm not telling you what you should tell me. It's the other way around. You should tell me what you do. So I try to put myself in that position. The first question they ask me is, what do you mean by sustainability? What can we give you? That's not what I want at all. So I try to make this clear, especially in the interview. Does this answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just going to ask you to clarify one more thing. Your focus on this thing you call sustainable education, it sort of puts you in one of the extremes, perhaps, within ESD. So do you think that has influenced your literature study on ESD and PBL? Or did you actually go through the whole field of ESD, or did you particularly focus on the as part?
I don't put myself in the extreme because I don't believe I'm a fundamentalist in this. I don't believe that we should remove development. But because we cannot, and this is a social constructivist view again, I don't believe we would step back into the development we achieved so far as a human society. So that's one point. What I see, it's a path. And it's when we need to change that the walk happens. That's why I put this rule. So, but as I also explained in this, and I talk, page 36, transformation, rebuild or redesign, very strong sustainability transition, sustainable education. In the table, the type of response number 4. I might actually be more explicit in the definition, or more clear. So I see it as a path, and I when I choose this title, it's not that I put myself, it's that I believe and I think we will walk through until the sustainable education. And it's very difficult because it involves a lot of dimensions. It's not the individual, it's the social. It's the local social, it's the regional social, it's the global social. And one of the most interesting sentences I read in literature. Okay, someone wants to get in.
No.
We cannot remove the development because we cannot ask to the entire world to say, okay, this qualitative, we should stop development and ask the south of globe to stop. And we, north, continuing or stay as we are. So there's need to have some development and it should be sustainable. So it's not only the education for or education of as, but also to be more uniform.
But then in which way is it a path that we walk? Is it the individual development for an institution or a teacher? Or is it the development generally over time?
I think it's both. I think it's both. Because in the 60s you have individuals forming environmental movements, and now you have institutions and policies coming. The accreditations bodies are one example that they are stating sustainable development in their learning outcomes as a part of the quality criteria. ABET, for example. So it's not individual. I think it's both.
So do you have to walk that path, or could you, in principle, go directly towards the
I think you need to
as
go.
sustainable development?
And of course, if they already born in such a place, because culture is also transmitted and constructed. So if we as a collective and individual, we are walking through this path, but once we are in that path, those that are born and raised, they already have it embedded. But if there is a needed tradition after, because along history you see transitions in social paradigms, and sustainable development is one. I recently asked an engineer, what is the most trends in your research area? And it has related to sustainable.
Okay. Then I better understand your starting point.
Thanks for the explanation. Dori, did you have anything to add to this issue?
Yeah, well, I've been a bit surprised when you stated that you are not a fundamentalist because you will not resign development because of sustainability. That's how you say so, no?
I didn't understand, sorry. You were surprised that I didn't say
That you mentioned that you will not sacrifice development because of sustainability, so to speak.
No, I think it's that development will not stop. It's not that I sacrifice. It's because if it's I, it's more individual. So that's.
But here, epistemologically, I think there is a misunderstanding not between the community which is working in sustainable development, but between politicians at higher level, because most of the time development is understood as growth. And then we are talking about sustainable growth, which is an oxymoron actually. We cannot grow sustainably in a sustainable way. So for me, it's development, and for the community, development is improvement. So it's a continuous improvement. That maybe for business sector they understand this concept of continuous improvement, but sustainable development is continuous improvement. And then of course, development, which is improvement, should be everywhere and in different regions of the globe. Should go in different ways. One, we should improve in terms of reducing our environmental impacts, and in other parts of the world they should improving their social standard of living. But I was a bit surprised that you mentioned that when you say that you are not a fundamentalist in terms of development in first and then it's sustainability. If I understand it
No. It's just I talk when I say that because some of the interviews I had, some told me one in particular, and then it's actually what starts me thinking about it. She told me, I don't believe in education for sustainable development, it should be education for sustainability. And I would like to spend more time looking into this, because sustainability principles are needed, but how I see it, I see sustainability as a vision, as how I see it. And it's actually also to some stated, so you have these principles, you have this vision, you have this future that you want to achieve as an enlightenment in that sense. When it comes to sustainable development, it's more down to earth, what you actually can do, and an improvement to maintain equality, but without jeopardize the future. And that's also in engineering education for sustainable development documents. There was two I found very interesting competencies. It's the flexibility and the adaptability, because you can develop something today taking in all considerations, things social, economic, environmental, but you always have to make trade-offs. And you cannot say in future this will have no impact. This future is no, because you don't know in 10 years what it will actually develop now. In the long term, it might have some impact. One example was one of these, a new greenhouse gas effect that has much more power, much more effect than a CO2, and it was just discovered recently, and it's related with the energy, electrical power plant. So that I think that competency, flexibility, and adaptability, I think they're very nice concepts. They are important concepts to have, because you have to compromise. You cannot say this is 100% sustainable. You don't know. You don't know. So I don't think development should be upfront sustainability. I think because if we have vision as sustainability, that's what will drive development. It's the worldview. It's what you believe and what. So it's the epistemology, right?
And then I have a question related also what you are talking, and I think we will come afterwards. You are talking about the two views, a real world view and an ivory tower view, and that sustainable development, education needs both. Can you justify why we need also this real world view in terms of transmit knowledge, understanding, and competences?
Sorry.
Yeah, the question is,
I understand
with these two views, there is one view of higher education institutions as an institution which role is to transmit knowledge.
Production and transmission. It's the ivory imagination. So
And that's the ivory view, but there is also the
combination of the real world and the ivory tower. The sustainability should have both. Is that you have the ivory imagination is close to the combination. It's how higher education systems see their roles. Just knowledge production, and the knowledge production stays inside the academia world. It has no relation with social impact. It's not applicable. It's the enlightenment view in the ivory tower. I was educated in the ivory tower. And the real and pragmatic view, it's much more, knowledge has a function to be applied, and then it's contextualized. So if an ivory tower is much, and a metaphor, an analogy, if an ivory tower is much more related with a pure science, the real world would much more be related with the application of that knowledge as engineering.
Yeah, but then my question goes in the direction that when you're talking about this real world view, about the transmission of knowledge, and I think higher education has not the role of transmission of knowledge, has the role of creation of knowledge.
But you also educate, and how you educate the future generations, transmission beyond the knowledge you create and research.
Yeah. It depends on the level you are talking in higher education, but I am more in the co-creation of knowledge, not transmitting knowledge when we are talking about the sustainability, education for sustainability. Well, this was but it was a bit confusing to me to that stating that the role of higher education was transmitting knowledge, which to some extent is necessary. But
Lodi, could you remind us where you find this quote? Because it was very specific.
yes,
It was in the beginning of the
yes,
chapter. I think it's in
page
32.
32. Yeah. For me, what which was surprising was this role of higher education to transmit knowledge. I mean, maybe at first year of bachelor student, maybe this is the role somehow, but afterwards it's more the co-creation of knowledge together. But when we are talking about sustainability competences which are related to values and principles. Well,
But let's make clear, Aida, that Jordi asked you to comment on this sentence, and I just quote here: the purpose of university is to transmit knowledge, understanding, and competencies for profession. That's a clear part of a sentence.
Yes,
yeah,
but that's a real view.
real people, and there is the our view.
Yeah.
But that was the question from
Yeah.
you. That
Now the question is answered.
Okay. okay.
But I can formulate, yes.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
If I may take up from there, I would say that this could be one of the examples, and examples are always difficult to isolate, where you demonstrate that you search for information very carefully, you search the literature, you talk to experts, but then what we expect you to do is to give your own interpretation to this information that you find. And sometimes we feel that it is not really clear where's the line of distinction between the quote, yes, I have to say it like this because that was in my source, and what you really think yourself. So when you talk, there will be some author who has said that it is the purpose of universities to transfer knowledge, but that could be debated. And we think it is important that in such cases you also indicate how you feel about that yourself, what you think. And then in particular in relation to these sustainability development, what do you think universities should do? What is their task? What is your belief?
Okay. I think when I was writing this, I think if I want to attribute a role to higher education to construct a sustainable and fair future, I have to understand as well what are their roles in society. Because I don't believe and I don't see universities as isolated systems. That's the first one. They are open systems. They are part of subsystems in bigger systems, so we can escalate on this. So I don't believe they are closed systems. So I don't think that the knowledge production or creation as just for the sake of knowing should be the only view and the purpose. That's the only thing. So this has to have a meaning. On the opposition, you have that everything that's created, that everything that's it's applied and has to have a pragmatic purpose. I think for the education for sustainable development, for sustainability, there has to be a balance. So it has to have, there is a need to, and that's why we all continue to do research. And it's also a curiosity of a human being.
Okay, I think we get to the next point from here. I just wanted to comment that this picture is very Zen.
Zen?
Yes, it's about the path, not about the goal.
Yeah. But it's also about the process perspective, so I
Yeah.
cannot jump to the goal, then it would be
No,
completely
that's the Zen vision. It's the process is much more important than the goal. Jordi, you
Yeah.
would like to introduce the topic of the problem definition.
Yeah, next topic is related to, we are talking about problem-based learning, sorry. and you have a good definition of problem definition. Sorry for the repetition. And you say that there are different kind of problem-based learning approaches, as you presented before. But one of the roles is that the students identify, analyze, and formulate a problem to be solved. So the students themselves should formulate the problem depending on the analysis that they make previously. My question is, which is the role of transdisciplinarity in problem definition? Do we need transdisciplinarity approaches when defining the problem in order to that problem-based learning is more efficient for education for sustainable development?
That's a very good question, and I have to answer by parts. I think it depends on the goal and on the level you are educating. That's one. Transdisciplinarity. I will tell a story now. I'm facilitating, because I think this is a very good example. I'm facilitating, I'm supervising groups on the first year of media technology. And they have sustainability as a sub-theme, as social responsibility was it. Last semester was sustainable lifestyles. And in the problem analysis, to formulate the problem, they have to do a research. And they talk with stakeholders. They go out and make a research. So you have, it's a kind of natural thing that comes in as transdisciplinarity. They are not academicians. Their subject areas is media technology. They design software, they design hardware to be used. So what they do is actually they have a broad theme, they have some constraints, and they have to formulate a problem. So they have to figure out their own scenarios. And that's where transdisciplinarity, to some extent, comes in, because they have to go out to figure it out, the scenarios. For example, they start with social responsibility, community engagement, healthcare, public participation. I think they had public participation. So they have 8 themes. Security, so they have the sustainability, the social responsibility. So they have to define what is the social interactions, they have to define social responsibility. And this they have to ramificate and then have a sub-theme in this. And then they link with the project constraints. They had an old man in a big city. Okay, access to information or mobility. Then they start to go out and see where actually are the old people, what are their problems, if they have social interaction, if they need some kind of specific healthcare technologies. And then they talk with nurses that are practitioners, stakeholders. They talk with patients or elderly people. They talk with the community, the municipality services as what facilities they give, what social support they give. And then they come to a problem, kind of what kind of solution, or what the solution sheet, X, because they already have an idea of what they want to do, can help to provide this. And then they develop the technology, they test the technology with the stakeholders, they evaluate, they redesign, they have these cycles. So you have transdisciplinarity in a problem analysis and formulation. But it comes naturally, because the type of problem that is given, it's very broad. They have 2 themes, and they have to stick. And you have this also semester time frame. If you have a week, can you do the same? Because they need time. So that's why I ask. It depends. It depends on the type of problem. It depends on the type of the year they are. If they are in the first year, the second year, if they are bachelor students, if they are master students. Because when I was doing my interviews, there was some concern about if we put something we have to take out. So and we do it with immediate technology, and students respond very well, and and they come with very interesting things, and they have a transdisciplinarity approach to the problem analysis.
So from your point of view, you mentioned at the beginning that it depends on the level of the student.
It depends on several factors, I would say. It depends on the type of problem, it depends on the time for them allocated for them to solve the problem. Because if you give a problem that is much more narrow, they might not need transdisciplinarity. They might have, but it's not very diverse. It might be only a specific target group of people because it's what is directly related, for example, external to the condition. So it depends on several factors.
So, related to that, I have one question, which is how problem definition affects the role of project and learning in education professional development.
It affects on the type of learning outcomes and contents of students, the type of problem. So you have different types of problems. You have more narrow, which is the information is given. It's much more disciplinary oriented. So students will have a solving approach that will lead to a technical solution, or so the learning outcomes in terms of critical thinking might be different. The learning outcomes in terms of holistic and systems thinking might be different as well.
So then my next question, because I had another question. Do you think that all students should have to go through programs which have a transdisciplinary approach when in its definition? Shall we assure that for instance, in our university?
I think so.
Are you doing that? Is it done?
We are doing in one. The interesting thing here is that.
Excuse me. Let's put it in a different way, which is, I think it's easier to understand. Can a project without transdisciplinarity approaches in its definition and realization be useful for education for sustainable development?
Yes.
Yeah.
But yes, but it depends. And here is actually what the students become engaged with to solve the problem. Because if they are the ones picking the scenarios, it's their choice, it's their experience that lead them to pick a specific scenario. They are the one analyzing and making the decisions of what counts and what doesn't count. So their involvement, it's totally different if I give the problem and they don't analyze it, because they don't have the ownership.
No, that's for sure. But then the next step is when they don't frame the program. The program is by stakeholders, which are the ones who are going to be involved because of the solutions they find to the problem. So my question is, if we don't have this transdisciplinary approaches in the definition of the problem, can project-based learning be a good tool for education professional development?
Yeah.
Can it be without these transdisciplinary approaches?
Yes.
Why?
Yes, but it's not the same. It's like giving someone, after the whole work done, give them something now you have to think about sustainability and the impacts and the consequences. And another thing is start to think since the beginning and have it present along the way. Of course, it can also come in the middle, along the solving process. But it's not the same thing. It's different. It's different if it is much more content and tool use based, or a much more pinpoint needs and the connections between the different stakeholders, the previous and the after, what was before. So it's adding things. It's adding elements. It can't, but it's different levels, I would say. it's different outcomes for sustainable for education for sustainable development. It's not that it's less, but it's different.
And I will continue on the same line of reasoning and introduce the idea of wicked problems. To me, education for sustainable development, I use that term and it has a broad meaning. It's not only about the direction of education, but it's also very much about the holistic view. Sometimes that requiring transdisciplinarity, of course. So we're on the same topic still. My question to you is whether you think that the ESD introduces a new complexity level to PBL practices that maybe PBL cannot even manage. I don't know. But these wicked problems that people tend to talk about sometimes in ESD, they are not only ill-structured, they are even impossible to formulate as problems. And they are filled with ethical dilemmas and very many different issues to manage. So does ESD put requirements on PBL that PBL perhaps cannot handle? I'm thinking, for example, how you describe PBL in your summary. In PBL, the learning process starts with analysis and formulation of a problem from real and ill-structured problem scenarios. If you can't even properly formulate the problem, if the problem formulation has to be defined alongside the sort of creation of solutions, is PBL suitable? And why didn't you introduce the concept of wicked problems?
Yeah. Because it was one more concept. No, but the problem scenarios, they can be wicked. I have a question as well, in that sense. And it's the question because I'm allowed to make a question?
Well, you want me to clarify something?
No. It's a reflection question that you say. Because how wicked is a problem, and how can you certify that the problem is not solvable? Or what is the quality standard of the problem you formulate? That it's not one, it's three. But it
No, what I will say is that you don't know beforehand.
Exactly. So when we put this if we wanted to call it wicked, if we want to call it dilemmas to students, we also have to hope that they are giving the best of them. And we are also guided, because these wicked problems to the supervisor or the teacher, they are also unknown by definition. And that's why you have to be adaptable. You have to be flexible. You have to be. You have to make a trade-off. You also need time. So, in the PBL structure, structure is not correct. We are looking into formal education, right? We have a time limit to educate, and we have a certain amount of knowledge, skills, and competencies that we need to be delivered, students to develop, and they have to come out, because there are always this question of the quality of the engineers that are educated in terms of basic knowledge and food. I think problem-based learning could adapt to a wicked problem, but not for a semester, for example, unless it was a much more higher level student. Bachelor students, they are coming out from high school. They are 19, 20 years old. So also, what do they need to understand of reality to actually engage in this? Maybe it's not only bachelor students. Maybe it's a group of mixing ages and mixing from master degree, from bachelor, from different, so it's a semester, it's complicated, I would say. So there is a flexibility in the model, there is an adaptation of the PBL, but in terms of principle, not as how it's practiced here for formal education in a semester to everywhere. So there is a flexibility on the principles behind and how the project, I would say, it's organized, how the problem is presented.
I would like to continue this topic for just one more moment. And yeah, I would start with the observation that you put a restriction on yourself by committing yourself to joining of two concepts of ESD and problem-based learning. You're investigating how I would say best to promote sustainable development in engineering education, but you decide right from the start that it should be within the context of problem-based learning. My observation is there could be solutions where maybe even more effective, well, that's a wrong word in this context, but you understand what I mean, where it could be very useful to look into sustainable development, but not in the context of problem-based learning. So my question is, why put on this restriction? And I have an embedded question inside that, because to some extent I think there might be an incompatibility between ESD and problem-based learning. You pointed out there are several similarities, but one of the core characteristics of problem-based learning for me is self-directedness. Self-directedness means that the teacher gives up some of the control. And when you aim for ESD, you don't want to give up the control. You want the students to study this particular area. So there is at least a tension between characteristics of problem-based learning and the desires that go with ESD. So please comment.
I don't agree.
No, you don't have to. Please
No.
explain it.
I
Explain it to
don't
me.
agree because I don't think self-directed learning is only the teacher gave up control. I don't think it's only that. I think self-directed learning is actually a very important principle for ESD if we see it in a long perspective, that students are able to relearn and reconstruct and go find their ways in this complex and these problems that can suddenly pop up and appear, the scenarios and everything. So I don't believe that it's a contradiction of incompatibility that you said. I don't believe. But and once again we are talking about formal education. And you need to start, you need someone to give you examples, someone that guides you, and then you take out the control. I didn't have that in my PhD, in my master, but the control was enormous in my bachelor. But to some extent, I need it to give me some ground where I can construct after, and then I had my way. So I think self-directed learning, I think it's actually very suitable for ESD in my perspective, in a long term. I don't
Okay, because you do not want students to be able to repeat the lines from the book. You really want them to integrate them, assimilate them in their system.
Assimilate them?
Assimilate, take it in as becoming one of their own.
Yeah.
Not something they borrowed from someone else.
No. Then they become more critical.
Yeah.
And that critical, it's something that become part of them.
Okay. Thanks very much for that explanation.
Yeah,
Ready?
I wanted to add, we are talking about the problem, and then I will reformulate your question, your research question. My question to you is ESD possible without PBL?
Yes, you can call it another thing, but some of the principles need to be there. Sorry, but it's so here it's not in terms of being problem-based learning as model A, B, C, or D that is practiced in whatever. it's about the principles behind. So if you give these conditions that are suitable and kind of provide the conditions, students learn for ESD. So you may not call it PEL. So in terms of principle, I don't believe you will not have. Yeah.
Can you accept that, Jordi?
Well, yeah, I have said that it is possible without PBL, but it's not possible without P.
Yeah,
You need
and
the P.
the
Maybe if it's a structure in a PBL framework, maybe it's easier.
Yeah.
I think that it will be easier. But you need the P, and
And the P, it's not only problems, it's also principles.
yeah, but I mean the problem.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, that's what problems.
I learned last week at the symposium that it means passion.
Oh
The P.
yes, it's true.
I think we can move on to the next topic, which is related to the three perspectives that you use in your research. And when I look at these three perspectives, I first would like to begin with your research question, which is rather open. And you indicate yourself it's an explorative research question. And I think an explorative research question that signifies that the level of theory development in an area is not very far. That you will have to do with some descriptions, but there is very, very little theoretical development. And then
I think it would help if you would put it up on the screen.
the three,
Oh yes.
The
yeah,
research question to begin with.
okay,
This
Yeah.
one, right?
Yes, this one.
Yeah, thank you.
yeah. So this, yeah, gives you a license to explore very, very widely. And in that wide exploration, you bring in these three different perspectives: the theoretical perspective, the expert perspective, and the practice perspective. And you collect data in these three segments, and then at the end, in your conclusions, you come back and you answer, or you indicate what kind of answers you have found for your research question within these three perspectives. Now, the thing that really interests me is to transcend these three perspectives, to look what is the additional value of looking at the whole rather than the three perspectives. And I somehow could not find that. Can you please comment on what you learned beyond the separate perspectives in a more complete picture of answering your research question? And I could rephrase that slightly different, saying what I'm looking for is basically what, in the end, in the summing up, did you contribute to the theoretical understanding of this sustainable development? Are we now one little step maybe, but are we further in understanding this concept from analyzing it from these three different perspectives, and does that add to one bigger picture?
Yes, I think so. First, I think I took this research in a very holistic way, and very, I will not say system, but holistic ways. I could only look into one particular principle and relate it with ESD in terms of learning. I could actually look into one topic of ESD and look into problem-based learning or other learning approaches. I found weaknesses, I would say, in the three. In the theoretical perspective, the ESD, to some extent, was the outcome of some pedagogies used, granted. It was not a lot of what actually are the conditions, what are the learning principles, and when you have learning principles, you can actually move to a level that you can actually formulate a learning philosophy or a learning theory for ESD. Of course, ESD as content need to be there, but it's become an explicit link. In the PBL, it's exactly the same. I found very hard to find the different learning theories principles that were linked in the beginning on the publications in the recent publications. So I was fishing around and reading it. So to some extent in the theoretical, I actually bring this together. Not only inside PBL, but also to some extent in ESD. From an expert perspective, as I mentioned before, I have an awareness of this fragmentation of what is being done in this country and that institution and here and there. So why not actually bring it together and see from a management change, from a change perspective, what actually is being done? What elements? Is there common elements? Is not common element? And then I know there are some publications, comparative study across 7 universities, but I tried to some extent, when I look, and also to the expert's perspective, when I look into the dimensions of change, to the integration, what are the dimensions, the curriculum, the learning outcomes, and I missed the assessment, but the curriculum, the learning outcomes, and so on, I actually, okay, this is actually an approach to design a new curriculum as well, or to change a curriculum from a perspective of design and development. And that's not so schematic or explicit stated as well in the publication.
Can we jump to make this more clear to the recommendations you make at the end? Because with this picture still in our minds, if we look at your recommendations, then the question is, where do the recommendations come from? From which perspective? And I have the sense that at least some of these recommendations are almost not your statement, but they are what some experts said to you, or what you found in a reference.
No, these recommendations are drawn from the case study and the experts.
So if I just stay with the first one, students have to be involved at all stages. Is that what you think? Is that what you find evidence for? Or is that what someone said?
That's what I found evidence for.
Okay.
Inclusive here, when actually students have their own opinion and a slightly different perspective of the learning and group work from the facilitators. So students might bring something new to the integration that academic staff or managers don't think about, for example, or add value.
Okay, your position is clear.
I would like you to go back to the former slide, and we're going to discuss perspectives a little bit more.
What's this one?
Yes, this one.
Oh, sorry.
No, that one.
So you have the research question, and you say that you have picked those 3 different perspectives. So first then, why these specific perspectives? And could there be other perspectives that could be useful?
Yeah, I think so.
It would be interesting to hear you reflect a bit on that.
I think actually that's a very hard question.
Why these 3 then, to begin with?
These 3, to some extent, they came naturally along the research process. There was a literature review. There was something that I could take out from the literature review as comparing or relating PBL and ESD from a theoretical point of view. Because also, my question to this was why it's suitable, why it's used. Because there's in a lot of case studies, a lot of strategies or a lot of initiatives of integration using problem-based learning. So I started by why, and also to understand how it's done from the literature. So that's how I took from the literature. And of course, when I did my literature, and this now I will move to the research approach. When I made this literature, I actually state and establish the criteria for analysis and actually what I want to research, what I want to investigate. When you ask me what other perspectives, I don't think actually adding, I think about removing and elaborate on some. That's how I think. Maybe
removing what?
For example, I could take the expert perspective and make a comparative case study with 3 or 4 institutions from which I interview the experts, for example.
What other important ideas, results would you have gotten from such a study then?
From the comparative?
If you did such a study instead.
The PBL models, for example. And the relation between the context and in culture of the institution with integration and also the change and the resistance to change, the drivers. Then I could compare the elements. I didn't do a comparative study. This is assumptions. But I could see the variables I investigated. I could actually see how they, if they change, or if they vary, and if they vary, what conditions then depend on, and from that, what actually can be done to move further. So I don't think in adding. So I think in removing and elaborating, especially in the case study. So if I had 6 or 9 years. It's true. It's a fact that we have time constraints to do the PhD, right? It's a fact. It's not an excuse, but it's a fact.
I think it is a promise that you will go for the habilitation.
Do you remember when you asked me how many PhDs you have in your first?
So let me continue. Why did you call the perspectives the way that you did, and is it a good representation? To begin with, let me ask if the literature review gives you a theoretical perspective, and what you mean by that.
There is a lot of, I read a lot of methodology, not a lot, I read 6. I read some books about research methodology. In each book there was a change of concept. The case study approach changed from book to book. Two books, the epistemological perspectives, they have different names. And I didn't actually find something. I didn't find clearly where I could put this, because also the research methodology was not kind of conventional, I would say, where you go to the book and you have, okay, research approach, okay, it's qualitative, then you have the literature review, yes, we do the literature review, but I took something from the literature review, I compare, but it's not the documentary analysis, not the comparative study as well. So, and I put this question to my colleagues as well. What should I call it? Literature review is not the documentary analysis. Are you doing analysis of theories? So it was a struggle within what the books about research methodology state, and to some extent what I move step further in what is normally conventional. That is the example of a theoretical perspective. The expert perspectives, there is no methodology. It's a method only. So it kind of falls in the same. But case study, it can only be, it calls a research methodology. So I found, okay, I could not ask, and another point, I could not compare the outcomes directly from one to another. It's comparing different things. So it doesn't make sense.
No, exactly. So then what do you mean by perspective?
It's
Because you're not really looking at different dimensions of your research
No.
questions.
it's,
No?
Sorry?
Are
I
you
was just thinking.
Are these three perspectives looking into different dimensions of your research question? Or how do you
To
see
some
it?
extent, but also they are related. They are not fully, but I took something from the experts to the case study, or are related somehow. There was something from the experts that it's done, that the outcomes of the final findings, because that's what I look into, the final findings of the practice, kind of, they are similar, they relate with each other.
These experts that you're talking about, they write papers in literature,
And they do research.
and they do research. But you have chosen to look into strategies for integration through interviews and similarities between PBL and ESD from a literature review. What about the other way around? Interviews for the first one and literature review for the second one.
Then I would go after the authors of books to interview.
Is it the same people that we're
No.
talking about?
No, it's not the same people. I think the first one are more theoretics, and the second one is much more practitioners. So it's not the same people. It doesn't mean that the first one are not, but when it's presented to me as being here and have access to their writings, it's different.
Because this is something that I couldn't really find any information on, explicit information. For example, what is it that you were looking for when you looked up an expert? What are you an expert in?
Yeah. I started to look into the definition of expert and novice. I understand as someone that has an experience, there's a lot of tacit in an expert as well, knowledge, but I started to see as someone that has an experience
Of what?
in integration and in research and education, in engineering education for sustainability.
But not PDL.
Some of them, yes.
So you were looking for someone who had experience of both.
Yeah.
But you found only a few, and most of them had experience mainly from integration of ESD.
Now I'm thinking about the cases. Most of them have problem-based learning. British Columbia, Canada, they have. Arizona State University, they have. And they have projects, these elective projects they have that they go to the humanitarian engineering, they go to Central America, Africa, and they carry out a project. Cambridge, I'm not 100% sure, but they have the Engineers Without Borders as part of their being assessed and but I'm not 100% sure. MIT in Australia they have. In Mexico I'm not 100% sure.
So this is what expert means then. And then you are an expert in ESD and TBL.
I hope so.
And then you are surprised that they answer that problem formulation and inclusion of problem in ESD is important.
Not necessarily. They could actually have others. There's one that says more research-oriented pedagogies. That is not.
I think you had a list that you showed with
Yes,
two
yes.
highlighted things on the top.
Yes.
I hope this is the right context. Yes,
Yes.
this is problem-based and project-organized. You were actually looking for people that had that idea already.
and the role, if they use it, how they use it, and why they use it, and it comes to,
Okay.
Jordi,
Yeah, I wanted
continue
to
with
add
this.
thing, but you are putting the question that I wanted to ask. But anyway. No, because you are saying, you are now just saying that ASU have PBL, but PBL in some context, I understand that maybe it's my misunderstanding that you were comparing, you were analyzing when a whole curriculum based in PBL can improve PhD. And some of the cases that you arise, like ASU and the others, don't have the whole structure, or Cambridge. They have some possibilities to have one PBL semester related to the final master, final bachelor thesis. And so then my question again is, let me formulate the question. Do you think that the whole curriculum structure, like you have here in Aalborg, PBL structure, facilitates ESD more than just having PBL in some places of the curriculum? Right.
I'm looking into this specific example. When we talk about the culture and the resistance to change, PBL is very crystallized here, how it's done. So it will imply changes in the curriculum. So it's just not coming with ESDF. No, it will imply changes. It will imply a staff collaboration, communication. It will imply also to students to cross and move out from the technical field they get in. They are signed for when they get in university. Imply changes. So it's not.
But PBL structure is more permeable to those changes that normal or regular.
I didn't study that.
Your thoughts, yeah.
No, because I think that in itself it's a research question, honestly, because then I have to analyze here actually in a more. I studied 2 programs. That's another thing. If I look into more programs, and actually, and it will not be a case study. Now I'm thinking with probably an action research. Then I actually could propose some change to see if they actually would be easier or not. So that's why I think it's from this perspective now it's not straightforward. It implies change, and it depends how people react to change as well. So
We stay with you, Jordi, exploring the next topic, core competencies of sustainability for engineers.
Yeah.
What should engineers know about sustainability and why?
One moment, please. Here in page 239, there is this scheme where you have the ESD competences, the PBL competences, and then they mix somehow. And you state that PBL dimension, and the name of the figure is quite interesting when you say PBL dimensions which can support the integration of ESD in engineering education. What is needed to move from can support to will assure? Because for me, those competences are instrumental competences.
yeah.
And then, of course, what is needed is that the competences that you have on the side of ESD, which are these ESD principles. But for me, maybe a challenging thing is how to introduce these ESD principles in PBL competences. Do you understand my question?
Yes, I understand.
So it can support this
Yeah,
way, but it cannot support in this way. It depends which are the principles.
Yes. One thing, in the beginning, because this is the theoretical perspective, I'm now focusing on the theoretical perspective. One of the questions I faced was when I started to read about PBL literature, and that's a mistake people should be aware of. I started to read PBL literature about principles, about competences, what students fulfillment, and method. And then I started to read about ESD. My immediately thought was like, okay, so if we have principles of PBL, then we have ESD. No, and that's a dangerous, because I have the learning principles, how the students learn, and that can be in a totally unsustaining direction and damage the entire world and a mass extinction of human being. So there is it's exaggerating, but
Maybe not.
I also have I'm a scientist background, so I know that mass extinction happens in the Earth history. So ESD principles kind of redirect our learning for a specific purpose, which is ESD. So when you say, no, I kind of lost a little bit track of the question. So the overlap is that it doesn't necessarily imply ESD.
Yeah.
So there is a need
that
of
can
principles.
support.
Yes.
I think that the quote is perfect because it says which can support.
Yeah.
But my question is, how can we move from can support to will assure?
Then we have the ESD principles and the content.
So you have to link them.
Yes.
And how? If you make some considerations on that.
Yes, and that's why in the second chapter, I tried to bring definition of ESD, of sustainability, definition of sustainable development, understanding of the learning principles, the visions of the tools as well, much more instrumental, much more down to practice, because that will direct the learning with this instrumental, the problems and meta-cognition. So they overlap here because it's similar.
Just a small detail on competencies. You are using both the word competence and the word competency, and it seems as if you do not make a distinction between them. I just want to hear if you...
That's a good question, because competency with a Y at the end.
Yes, and competence with an E in the end.
Yeah.
Are you making a distinction?
No.
Okay.
No, and I didn't realize that.
Hmm? But it would have been very interesting to hear your answer,
I thought
regardless, because there are so many different definitions of both of these words.
So then I give you my interpretation of what is competence.
Yes, please do.
Because I thought you were going to ask about skills and competencies.
That's interesting too. Please elaborate on that.
So you have knowledge, skills, and competencies. First of all, competencies is something. Skill is much more instrumental. Know how. You know you are good in a laboratory. You are good doing something, managing, using an instrument and making measurements, and you are skilled in that. You make it fast and well. For example, when it comes to a competency, you have a reflection component on the action of doing the skill with the knowledge and the direction you take. So that's how I see it. So,
You were talking about knowledge, skills, and competency. What about attitude?
Yeah. Because I include competencies and attitudes. Because it's the reflective part towards action. So your attitudes influence your actions. Yeah.
But on the other hand, there are some authors which put knowledge, understanding, skills, and attitude behind competence. And competence is everything.
Yeah,
So it
exactly.
depends on the literature.
But understanding, I see it as part of knowledge.
Are you working with Bloom or with Solo?
The Bloom revised? No, I look into both. But for criteria, I think Bloom it's much more straightforward because it gives you the verb that. But sometimes it's not very clear.
Bloom is also very determinist.
Yeah, exactly. but I use this for the research methodology.
Thank you. We get to our last category of questioning, and that is the methodological issues. Magdalena, can you open this topic?
I'm going to open it by discussing with you a little bit generalizability. Would you again take up your research question? In which ways can PBL support the integration of sustainable development in engineering education? That's a quite general statement. And then I read from your closing reflections on page 247. The outcomes of the study are mainly suitable for Aalborg University due to its strong contextualization. And then I read further on page 235. As a final remark, the above recommendations compose a multi-initiative strategy to integrate DSD in engineering education, especially for Faculty of Engineering and Science, Aalborg University. So, who can use these results? Should the research question even have been more narrowly formulated? Because it really takes a while.
Yeah.
Going through your thesis before you understand that, this is maybe some of the results are quite specific for Aalborg. You don't get that impression early on.
No. The specificity, it's because of the case study and the in-depth and the amount of data and how I get to learn this context. I have 3 times more data from the case study than from the other 2. So when I come to do recommendations, or I need to be careful to some extent that not overgeneralized based on this. So that's why I say in the specific context of. But and then we go back to the type of case study. Because if this is a single case, but it's a critical case, and then the program done. But the thing is that the case has characteristics from the PBL point of view, which is strongly institutionalized. I know I can say institutionalized from top down to the bottom line. There's a handful of institutions that have these conditions. It's not the same having a PBL in a program level or have a course level. There's a lot of examples of teachers and programs trying to change from problem-based learning, but they have constraints in terms of assessment, and they've not aligned with the PBL model or PBL principles. PBL principles. So this I was able to study at the institutional, or what is the institutional culture of PBL supporting this. So when I make the recommendations of mega projects, cross-program projects, because all the programs actually work through projects. So that's our conditions, that if an institution has such specificities, then the results are suitable. If an institution wants to create such conditions, then the research might be suitable as well.
So you think that you have also described the specifics of the institution enough for people to be able to interpret if the results are valid?
I described the organization. I described the curriculum structure. I described the type of problems. In broad terms, I think so. Of course, that always depends on what I want to know, and if it's not here. Some questions I might wondering, then not might be here. And as another person to read in this, for example. So I cannot state yes, it is, because it might not be for another person.
Good. Thank you.
Terry?
You go? Yeah.
Yeah. Following Magdalena reasoning, so your suggestions are for our university because your program is PBL. Can your suggestions be useful for another university with a program organized around PBL? For instance, imagine you have Malaysia here and have a PBL EPM program. Can the same suggestion work there, or the suggestions are very contextualized to our Western society?
Some of the suggestion here, yes. And from what I know and I heard last week, yes. Because we had someone from Malaysia coming here, and they have ESD in the first year, and they have project, and what was given, what the person was presenting, it has, I found some similarities. Of course, I have to look into more detail and everything, and also look in, okay, what are the contextual factors, characteristics of this context, and let's see what are the contextual characteristics of this context. Also, okay, maybe not copy-paste, but adapt. So what is suitable for you? Because you know, you are brought in that system, so you know it from inside out. So you are the one knowing better how things can be changed and worked and transformed. So it's not me telling what to do, it's them reading. Yeah. So please read.
I have a final addition to the methodological debate, and I think it is just appropriate to address this issue. It is about the relation between quantitative and qualitative research. You indicate you have a very open research question, and it is appropriate to work with qualitative research design. However, when I look at the variables that you identify on page 76 and the criteria for your research that you mentioned, then among these variables I see critical thinking and process competencies. And both of these are variables which are, how do you say, that they're very appropriate for quantitative measurement. There are tools to assess the level of process competencies. There are tools to assess critical thinking, and it could result in a different type of research than just collecting opinions of people. So my question is, why did you choose to focus on the qualitative research only and not to follow up the possibility of working with a mixed method design and including some quantitative aspects where it might be appropriate?
First, I think it has to do with the goals of research. Also has to do with my epistemological view, and I want to understand more than quantify or know what is how much in terms of these concepts. I could make a questionnaire from critical thinking. Yes. Critical thinking data actually was through a checklist. But it doesn't make sense to me, sorry. It doesn't make sense to me asking people to put, I agree very much when I was giving them the answers and they just have to quantify it and they are not giving me their, what they actually do. I'm assuming that I know. So to do that, first I would focus on critical thinking, research. I would have observations, preliminary observations, where I actually would collect some indicators And I had to have a lot of observations to see as I can gather as much as information that could actually generalize and describe what is the group dynamic, critical thinking, sorry. And I'm thinking that this should be done in groups observations. And after, I will make a questionnaire that could be as much as representative of all the critical things. I have that in my checklist to do.
Well, obviously, I have really more quantitative approaches in mind with the test-like approaches, but maybe this is some topic to be discussed later on to expand your scope on research.
I think we should do it.
Okay, that was the end of our line of questioning, I think. You have one?
A more generic one.
Okay.
I'm actually going to give you the same chance that I gave Din yesterday, but I'm going to pretend to be even more generous today. What about I would give you 1 year to do anything you could to develop this further? What would you focus on? What would you do? What would you develop?
So I can also be very ambitious. Yeah. So I would do these experts. I would transform into cases. However, I had to look into this case and maybe maybe do something more or take it out so it can be comparable. So I would do a comparable study at the worldwide. Actually, so I had to
assuming that these experts have suitable cases then.
Yes. At least some of them have problem-based learning. And I would focus maybe on the problem scenarios, because that was something interesting that I looked into here. The second, I would do much more programs. I would study much more programs than just this. Two. And then I would write a lot of papers. And a book maybe. So I asked to be ambitious.
I think that's a promise. We have to write that down.
But to finalize, I also try, and this is really, so then I would move for the second year. I had a lot of specific questions after. One was the problem scenarios. Another was the group dynamics. Because I think that is very interesting to look into how the group dynamic can actually push forward in this. If you have one that is motivated for it, could it actually influence the others? And the personalities, how they play for the group to work, function well or not. So I think the group would have a lot of potential to be investigated further. And I don't think there is a lot.
No. I think you're actually suggesting full new PhD projects.
Yes, but I only have 3 years. So that's life.
Thank you.
Okay, then I think that concludes our line of questioning. There were no other questions, so I give back to the chair of the
Just
session.
wanted to say something.
Sorry?
I just wanted to say something.
Mona, there is still one more comment from the audience.
Well, it's not a question, it's just I would like to congratulate for your work, because I really love reading your dissertation, and I think that now you are really an expert on that, and we will ask you many questions when we are implementing PBL. So thank you for your work.
And I would like to say thank you on behalf of the audience and on my own behalf for a very interesting and informative discussion here. I learned a lot today. And since there were no questions from the audience, then I think it's for you three to withdraw and stay in the room until we see the white smoke come out. And for the rest of us to go and see whether Marianne has prepared the reception. And in the meantime, we'll also put our
It is like parents putting their teenage daughter the freedom to choose at what time she will come home after going out on Saturday night, as long as it is before 11 o'clock.
But should we move to the common room?
We can go to the classroom or to my room.
You still have the meeting room upstairs.
Yeah, that's what I said.
They nearly live there. They have been there
Yeah,
for 2 days.
But we want to make prints.
Eric, I assume you'll take care of Selena and Jonas,
Yeah.
and just come and join us
When we have the white smoke, yes.
when you have the white smoke.
When we have a new pope.
De der blomster skal vi først have. Er det om?
Somebody put stop. How do we stop?